Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I understand that we are running 2 minutes late. I just want to start off by apologizing. There is a huge accident on the highway, and our guests who are making their way to the venue have contacted us and requested sincerely that we just hold on a little bit on beginning the program, and we shall do so. But I think it makes sense to begin the program just a little bit with some context regarding why we are actually here and what are we doing here and what's this program about and what's the book launch about and how did it come about. So I have on stage with me the author, former Deputy Minister of Basic Education, also a former Minister of Justice, and co-author along with Dr. Quresh Patel of the book Liberating the Law. Welcome, and welcome to the guests who have arrived as well, and welcome to those who are joining us on streaming. Appreciate your patience as well. So, Mr. Surti, what brought about this project? I mean, it's been 20 years since the passing of the late Chief Justice, who was a man of great intellect and impact to the South African Constitution, the South African law, jurisprudence. Why now? What made you decide to take on this project and this initiative, 20 years after his passing?
Thank you very much.
Your mic.
Thank you very much, Sumaya, and may I take this opportunity of recognizing some of our guests who are out here, the Deputy Minister for Justice and Correctional Services, John Jeffrey, with whom I've worked for many, many years. We have Judge Nafsa from the Supreme Court of Appeal and his partner. You are most welcome. I think Judge Poonan is there as well. Thank you very much. We have Commissioner Amir Mia, who is present out here. Now, all our panelists who are going to be participating have indicated they've called me. We've got Professor Thuli Madonsela, who is on her way. We've got retired Justice, Deputy Justice Dikgang Moseneke, and he's indicated to me that he had left much early, but he's also caught up with the traffic as a result of this awful motor collision on the highway. So all our panel, Professor Ziad Mutala has flown in from Cape Town. He has been circulating, in other words, moving from one side of the highway to the other side of the highway for more than 2 hours in an endeavor to get here on time. So what we're doing really is utilizing this time before we start with the formal program, just to engage with the audience and to give you a sense of why we are here and why we are celebrating the life of Ismail Mahomed 20 years after his passing away. As we do so, we want to remind the viewers, those of you who are joining us on live stream, as well as the audience here, that tomorrow is International Human Rights Day. And we have a wonderful program that is taking place at Constitutional Hill. Most of it would be Zoomed and not physical. It has 2 parts. The one part is on the United Nations chapter of human rights for the SADC region. Then we have a partner, the South African Human Rights Commission. We have the Department of Justice and Correctional Services. We have OCAF, who is also sponsor of this event and the book that we're going to speak about, and ourselves, that is Project Justice. So that event there is about the launch of a second book, and that book there is a book of essays in honor of Chief Justice Ismail Mahomed. The contributors to that book are, amongst others, Professor Thuli Madonsela, Professor Ziad Mutala, Judge Dennis Davis, Professor Halton Cheadle, Anissa Mohammed, the niece of Ismail Mahomed, who is a distinguished and senior lawyer in Pretoria, and many others. These wonderful, eminent persons have thought it fit and necessary to acknowledge, to recognize, and to affirm the contribution of Ismail Mahomed. So that is tomorrow's event. It will also be live streamed, and the program director would be able to give you information. I now turn back to, and this is what we do as politicians. I was a former politician, so we play for time, we skirt around the issues, and then we speak directly to the question. So I'm doing something that is quite customary for us as politicians. Ismail Mahomed was a legend, and you have the Deputy Minister John Jeffrey, and amongst the things that he and his minister had initiated when he was appointed as Deputy Minister was to recognize Ismail Mahomed through an essay competition. I recollect, as we were doing our research, reading one of his many presentations for the finals, when the finalists were awarded their gifts. And he said that Ismail Mahomed was quite an extraordinary person. He was the first in many things. He was the first silk, in other words, a senior counsel who was black. In 1974, Ismail Mahomed achieved the status of a senior counsel, the first amongst the black, in the black legal community. And it was quite extraordinary, and he was quite young. Ismail Mahomed was also the first in that he attended University of Witwatersrand, and he had to do so and could only do so by applying for permission to attend a whites-only university. So he would travel from Pretoria to Wits University daily by train in the beginning and later on by car. And quite extraordinarily, he passed his Bachelor of Arts with distinction. But he did something more unique, and that's the first again. He did his final year Bachelor of Arts degree with his honors degree in the same year, and he passed both cum laude with distinction. So that's the first for the university, and there too he had to acquire special permission to do his final year and his honors degree at the same time. Then, another first, he completed his LLB. When he completed his LLB, there were 2 students who passed with 7 distinctions, and he was one of the 2 students who did so. That's another first. So he is a person who has acquired and achieved much in terms of first. I think John Jeffrey also indicated that he was the first judge to be appointed in South Africa, and he did so after the release of Nelson Mandela. At that time, he was the Chief Justice of Namibia. And obviously, Nelson Mandela, Madiba, had requested him to return home because he probably, as visionary as he always is and was, had something in store for him and something that he had to do on behalf of the nation. So Ismail Mahomed accepted the appointment, although he had previously been offered the position as a judge. He refused to acquiesce to a system that was oppressive, where judges had to implement laws that were repressive and had no sense of morality. And Ismail Mahomed believed, as a judge, that there has to be an indivisible link between law, morality, and justice. So Ismail Mahomed then became the first judge that was appointed. And in the book, and I hope you do, there are books at the back available for sale, and we might mention to you from the 250 hard copies, 230 have already been sold. From the soft copies, another 250 have already been sold, and the book has just come into print a day ago. So that was Ismail Mahomed. If he can do that without anybody even looking at the book, it means that this is an extraordinary person. Now you'll find a photograph, in fact there are 2 photographs in that book. The one is on his appointment as a judge in the Gauteng division. You would see some 50 judges, all male, all pale, sorry John Jeffrey, and you find Ismail Mahomed amongst them. And then comes his appointment again, the first, and I'm stealing from John Jeffrey, but he's given me permission to do so. I imagine I'm taking part of your speech for tomorrow, John. Please forgive me for it, but it's a question of you being able to adapt to it. He was the first judge of the Supreme Court of Appeal, first Chief Justice of South Africa. Now, as a Chief Justice of South Africa, one would have celebrated the appointment of a person of such great intellect who had a firm footprint in the legal fraternity. Everybody knew about Ismail Mahomed. Everybody knew about his accomplishment. He was serving as a judge of appeal in Lesotho, in Namibia, in Swaziland, and the Chief Justice in South Africa. And yet you had 100 senior judges who were white, who opposed the appointment of Ismail Mahomed as Chief Justice, notwithstanding his achievement, notwithstanding his intellect, notwithstanding his incredible ability, which everybody had spoken about. And that, again, basically is the first appointment and the first resistance from the judiciary that are supposed to be representing a set of values where they would commit themselves to equality, where they would look at the advancement of human rights. But that's the reality that Ismail Mahomed had to go into. He was also the first black person to go into the White House, that is in Bloemfontein. And he was quite upset that he was now asked to occupy the White House in a city where previously he was not allowed to stay overnight. So as was custom in the past, Ismail Mahomed would have to meet the judges in the Supreme Court of Appeal, or the appeal court at that time, the day before. It's a courtesy, it's a custom and convention. So Ismail Mahomed would then go down to Bloemfontein, meet the judges, and then have to leave to go either to Durban or to the former Transvaal, only to return the next day. He would argue brilliantly, as he always does, win cases and persuade senior experienced judges. I mean, that's the highest court, the apex court at the time. And notwithstanding that, when it is lunchtime, he would have to go to his car and have his sandwiches in his car, because he was not allowed to share, to have lunch in the restaurant or even in the common room. He was not allowed to go to a restaurant in Bloemfontein, and that was the reality that Ismail Mahomed had to go to after being appointed as Chief Justice. So you can imagine the anxiety, the agony, the pain of a man who had this previous experience as a very competent, highly efficient, committed, intellectual giant, now goes as Chief Justice to a place where he's reminded constantly of the realities of yesteryear. So that was Ismail Mahomed. So these are among the first things about Ismail Mahomed. Now, we were fortunate enough, and many of us as lawyers, young lawyers, and Judge Nafsa would also will be one of the panelists over here. He would share his insight. Ziad Mutala is a panelist. He would share his insight, and others who would experience life with Ismail Mahomed would tell you what a huge impact Ismail Mahomed had on his life. And I hope my friend and colleague Soraya Hassan, she's a senior counsel, is here. When I was appointed as Minister of Justice, and that would be some 12, 13, 14 years ago, we visited the family of Ismail Mahomed and offered to do the biography of Ismail Mahomed. And we said we would do that free of charge. He's such a legend, a giant of a person. And at the time, quite correctly, they said they had given a commitment to somebody else, another writer, and they would gladly have me do the biography on Ismail Mahomed, but because of the commitment that they had made, they declined the invitation. Obviously, we were delighted that somebody was doing something about Ismail Mahomed and recognizing him. And it so happened that we were then appointed in different ministerial positions. We got busy with our lives, only to learn afterwards that 20 years, almost 20 years had passed, and nothing has been written about Ismail Mahomed, other than the journal, his publications in the journals, where he was the author, other than beautiful obituaries when he passed on. There was no dedicated journal to Ismail Mahomed, but there were many about other judges. There was no book on Ismail Mahomed, and yet he was in the forefront of transformation, constitutional transformation. And we said, no, we have to do something about it. My colleague, Dr. Quresh Patel, and I had just at the time, it was in the beginning of the year, we had assisted a teacher of ours some 50 years ago, Hussein Ayub. His book is also here in completing his autobiography. So 50 years prior to this year, Quresh Patel and I were in the same class in Lenasia High. I had to travel from Rustenburg to Lenasia to get a better education because those were the realities of yesteryear. And Quresh and I decided that we should do something about it. We spoke to Harun Kalla. Harun Kalla is the chairperson of OCAF, is a personal friend, and he had absolutely no question about it. He says, look, I will assist you with your administrative costs. I will assist you with the printing. Please go ahead. You have my authority. And indeed, he kept to his word. There was no difficulty whatsoever. So whilst ours was a labor of love, obviously there are costs involved in this, and there are many, many costs in terms of transcription. I just met one of your colleagues, Sumaya, at the back, who's helping over here. Yeah. She did the transcriptions of many of the interviews that Judge Nafsas included, Judge Kachalia, Albie Sachs, etc., etc. So there were many things that happened. But what was unique about this experience is firstly, courageous willingness to do it and share the burden with me, because we had a commitment to Hussein Ayub, and we had to complete that in 6 weeks, which we were able to do. And again, thank you to you, Sumaya, and we will talk about you later at some time. And then we had Ismail Mahomed, and you can't take Ismail Mahomed lightly, because he was eloquent, he was deep intellect, he was a visionary. So with Ismail Mahomed, you have to be very serious about the task at hand. And we decided, no, we'll take it on. We had scheduled a colloquium for the 22nd and the 23rd, which was going to be hosted at the University of Witwatersrand. That was the alma mater of Ismail Mahomed. It's quite unfortunate that they haven't really come to the party other than giving a one-page message of support. It's astounding. When the man, and this is it, I could say to it and I'm live stream, when the man served in the Faculty of Law free of charge, when the man served as an external examiner for labor law free of charge, when the man basically shone the light of greatness on the institution, and all the institution comes with 3-paragraph acknowledgement to say, he's a wonderful person, we're very proud of him. That was the University of Witwatersrand, and you'll see it in the book as well, and compare it to what comes from the Minister of Justice, Minister of Arts and Culture, and you would understand my disappointment. So which means that again, and this is where the conversation comes, and amongst the interviews you would find at least two of the senior black judges indicate that, there is this liberal tendency to affirm those who are white and ignore those who are black, who have made an enormous contribution. And we said, no, we have to do this, we have to be resolute, and we have to be resilient. And it was hard work. It was very, very hard work, but we've learned so much. We are so proud to have been associated with this project. And quite incredibly, and I share this with you with a great deal of pride, there wasn't a single person, and I'm talking about eminent judges, eminent advocates, white and black, who said they were too busy or they were unable to be, they were not available to be interviewed. They did so willingly, spontaneously, with great passion. And we must say that this book, they are indeed the spine of the book. They become the core of what you're going to find in the book itself, because it's their reflections, their perspectives, their information that were our eyes and ears in terms of us writing his narrative. So we are grateful for that. I will pause there, Sumaya. Yes, you must tell us when we are ready.
So I was just going to maybe ask for some quick context. I do see that we should be able to start with some of the program. Not all the panelists are here, but we'd be able to start with the welcome and some of the other messages of support. But quickly, before we get to that, you spoke about a colloquium. I know when you initiated this project, in 3 to 5 minutes maybe, if you can tell us about, I know it was broader than just a book. I know it's 2 books, and I know you referred to the colloquium, but there's also a documentary. What was the vision there? Why was it so broad, and what's the plans going forward, post-COVID-19?
Well, thank you for raising and reminding that, and that's perhaps the reason why Quraysh had you do what you are doing, Sumaya. We also decided to have a documentary on Ismail Mahomed, quite advanced. You'll see some segments of the documentary in the course of the program when it starts formally. That means interviewing various people, and again, nobody declined in the interview. And even when COVID was there, we Zoomed and we had some wonderful interviews. The documentary, unfortunately, because of COVID, could not be completed. We will launch that next year. The 2 books I've spoken about, the one that we're launching today and the one that we're launching tomorrow. I must say, with regard to the colloquium, that the Chief Justice, Mogoeng, has been quite astounding. He had absolutely no reservations about being available for the colloquium. He would give the opening address over there and would provide whatever support is necessary. Again, we had to postpone the colloquium because of COVID and because of the well-being, not only of the participants, but the audience as well. And we approached him to say, look, many of the presenters are willing to contribute to the essays, the commemorative monologue. Would you be willing to do the forward? There was no hesitation on his part, and if you read, by the way, there's only 80 left of those commemorative, only 400 are printed, the first edition, there's only 80 left of them, and if you read that, you would see what a beautiful forward he's put in motion. ask the president for Ismail Mahomed. Absolutely no reservation. Our president has done the forward for the book. So we had this about the spirit of Ismail Mahomed, that nobody could really say no to him. He was a person of such stature that people recognized his contribution and nobody would say no to him. So, Sumaya, that is it. And of course, when we approach Shamil Jusuf, the CEO of Vodacom, this is their kingdom, as it were. This is the Voda world. He didn't even blink. He said, you've requested it. His homeboy, they grew up under similar circumstances in the same place, and this is for Ismail Mahomed, and it is free of charge. So what you have basically is women and men who have contributed willingly and freely to keep the memory of Ismail Mahomed alive. Program Director Sumaya, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Surti. I think we will quickly start with some of the program. And should we need to engage again before the panel discussion, we'll call you back onto stage.
Okay, thank you very much. This is not part of the formal program. It's really to keep you occupied while we are waiting for the CEO and other panelists and guests. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. No problem. Good evening. Assalamu alaikum. Namaste. Dumelang. Sabona. Welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time and the effort, for driving all the way. Those of you who are logging in and watching us live stream, thank you so much for taking your time to click on the link and log in. And we appreciate, we understand the traffic, and we understand we cannot control this kind of circumstance. But of course, this is 2020, right? Anything goes, and we just have learned to roll with the punches. So welcome, and I hope you enjoy the evening with us. My name is Sumaya, and I'll be your program director. 2020 has been difficult, to say the least. South Africa, has been impacted severely. The lives of people, economically, our health sector, our education, our mobility, our social engagement has been impacted severely. But even with this uncertainty and crisis, there is some comfort that our legislation and regulation has been built we are so privileged to have the right of health and safety. And this regulation and policy, our COVID regulation and policy, is literally built upon these footsteps of those who have fought for the basic human rights. So I appreciate that you keep your masks on. I appreciate that you maintain social distancing. And I appreciate that you use the sanitizers as well that's placed on every table for your convenience. To think about this year, it has been heartbreaking in a certain sense. We've lost many that have been close to us, family members, friends. The Mahomed family has lost the second oldest sibling, Enver, during August this year. Oh, he would have been so pleased and proud to witness how we have brought the late Justice Ismail Mahomed to life. His brother, he loved dearly, the legend Ismail Mahomed. Apart from that, the late Chief Justice Ismail Mahomed spent his life in the pursuit of fighting for human rights and human dignity. We've lost as well to a very important human rights activist, George Bizos, Advocate George Bizos, and Commissioner Priscilla Jana. George Bizos was the advocate who moved for admission for Justice Ismail Mahomed's application for admission to the bar. And Priscilla Jana was, the attorney who was part of many of the trials, the political activist trials. And so our heart also sinks when we think of how many dear and near friends that we have lost during this year. If I may ask, please, for us to just bow our heads in respect and observe a few moments of silence to remember all those who have passed on, all those who have lost, including the late wife, the wife of Ismail Mahomed. You may bow your head. Thank you very much. Silence observed. Appreciate that. You know, not far from here is a suburb where Indians were displaced a long time ago due to the Group Areas Act. This place, infamously known, if I might say, is called Lodium. Lodium nonetheless has managed to produce great entrepreneurs and business people throughout the years. One of them being, of course, the CEO of Vodacom. Vodacom being the biggest telecommunication service provider in the southern African region. I'd like to welcome on stage Shamil Jusuf to address the audience. Thank you very much, Shamil. Appreciate it. You may use the podium.
Good afternoon. Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Vodacom World. It's a great pleasure and honor to welcome you here today to celebrate the launch of the book, Remembering the Life of Justice Ismail Mahomed. You know, when I got the call from former Deputy Minister Indusudi, who said, you know, we want to do a book launch. Firstly, I can't say no to Enver, so that's, you know, it kind of always twists my arm, and it's twisted my arm in many other ways where it's made me build schools and do all kinds of things. But I think, you know, the honor of being able to host it here is truly an honor for us. And I think as South Africans, we have to celebrate our leaders, our heroes that have made it possible for people like myself to stand here today and to address you. And, you know, I think the horrors of apartheid we often forget. And, you know, I was reading up a bit of his life and just the difficulties that he went through initially. And it kind of, you know, it reminisced because when I remember when I finished school, I had to start working immediately. And yeah, job said, regrets whites only. So, you know, reading how, you know, he had to shape other people's offices and the strife that he went through in the early years. But, you know, where he became recognized in many of the surrounding countries in Lesotho, Botswana, Swaziland, Namibia, having played an instrumental role in the whole region, but also having played a substantial role in CODESA and again in the formation of the Constitution, and then of course rising up to the very formidable post of Chief Justice. You know, this is someone who hails from our community. This is someone who throughout his career fought for the downtrodden. I must say, it's a humbling and a pleasure to stand here and welcome you to the book launch, where we honor and celebrate such a formidable leader. Also, congratulations to the editors and the writers of the book. I think, you know, kudos to you for taking the time and really making sure that we don't forget the lessons and the history, because we stand here privileged today, and I'm always cognizant of the fact that I wouldn't be standing here today as a CEO of such a big company had it not been for those leaders who fought for our rights. So thank you, and please enjoy the evening.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Joseph. We're going to, Harun Kala, I must say, Mr. Kala, he is going to be very pleased, and I think he's very excited because from what I know, the Legacy and Legends project and program that's run within AUCAF is such an important one. It's a program that recognizes people from all walks of life that have contributed positively. It could be positively to business, to politics, to the environment. It's something that is so important, and just this year alone, the Project Justice Trust and OCAF has published 3 books as part of the Legacy and Leaders program. I'd like to call on Mr. Harun Kala to give us a few words. Mr. Kala, if you don't mind joining us, appreciate it. Put in yourself.
In the name of God, the beneficent, the merciful, it's indeed an honor to be here this afternoon. And I just want to concur with our brother Shamil that if it was not for Judge Ismail Mahomed, Mandela, and all our liberation leaders, we would not be standing here today, being in the company of some very beautiful people. Places like this we could not be part of. It's only been made possible by our liberation leaders. But before I start my few words I'd like to share with you, I want to say, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I am very touched by this afternoon because Judge Ismail Mahomed was such a great human being, but not once that I am aware of, and having a read through some of the pages here, that he ever wanted anything. He only wanted one thing, and that was to serve humanity. And that's the clear theme that comes across every single act of his. And I'd like to elaborate on that a little bit. But these are the few words that I wrote for one of the forwards, and I'd just like to share this with you. 18th of June 2000 was a poignant and somber day for the audio. And it was somber, very sad. President Thabo Mbeki cleared the diary in haste to attend the funeral of a globally renowned humanitarian par excellence, the Honorable Ismail Mahomed, the first black Chief Justice of South Africa. And of course, you know, he was also the Deputy President of our Constitutional Court. Judge Mahomed, as he was fondly referred to, was a very busy man looking after the legal interests of the country. Mainly the liberating, the interest of those that were involved in liberating the country. That didn't allow him any time to spend with the local community. He was so involved, so immersed. And if you read this book, you'll understand that this man, his heart and his soul were 24/7 in understanding the cases that he took on and ensuring that he would find an angle that would make those liberation comrades of ours pass through legal minefields. Many occasions he succeeded. I just spoke to Minister Esop the other 2 days ago. He phoned me. He says, "I'm so excited about this book launch. Please accept my apology. I won't make it because of all the COVID restrictions, but I'm definitely going to be on there." He says, "Do you know, Judge Ismail Mahomed was there for me. During all my trials, he was available and he was defending me, and many of us." So he was busy himself. Of course, he could have come to any, he was invited to every wedding. Who would not have loved to have him at a wedding? But yet, he knew what was his priorities, and I'm sure his family would concur with me. And yet, despite this, his influence on the national scale not only had a direct influence on local affairs, but on every single person's rights, from the leafy suburbs to dusty townships. That's the legacy he left. No matter how busy he was, he would reach out to the community on important matters and offer wise counsel. And I stand here today saying to you, Alhamdulillah, I'm very blessed. He reached out to me on a few matters, advising me, giving me wise counsel. And the wisdom he brought, the foresight and the insight, I mean, I don't think anybody could have offered us those insights. Judge Muhammad's counsel was not only measured, but amazingly farsighted. He had a unique ability to calculate the multifaceted ramifications of problems at hand and tailored his advice accordingly. And I know from the people that we've spoken to, and Shiraz Ghoori is here, one of my cousins here, I think he worked in one of those offices. He told me he was a hard taskmaster. I mean, you read this book, he was a perfectionist par excellence. It was this recognition of his hard work that made Judge Muhammad's funeral one of the biggest that we had attended in Lodium. I remember the mosque was packed. We did not have opportunity in there. We had to, a lot of us had to read in the courtyard. The mosque was overflowing, and sympathizers of all religious groups, of all ages, it was amazing, who felt the gravity and colossal loss of an icon. They were all present to show solidarity for a sedulous comrade who had left an indelible mark on the legal history of South Africa. His understanding of law and his commitment to justice and humanity will always rank him as an extraordinary and exceptional human being. His contribution to South Africa was immense. Judge Muhammad's profound legal prowess allowed him to co-chair the CODESA peace talks that would determine the country's post-apartheid future when the Afrikaner government sat down to negotiate with the ANC. The Chief Justice, with his inimitable skills of traversing his way through complex legal cases, was able to oversee the technicalities of a peacefully negotiated transformation from an apartheid state to a non-racial one. This was a historic moment for South Africa that brought divergent views and parties in the interest groups and various interest groups together to form a government of national unity. What the great Nelson Mandela was to the political process of liberation is what Judge Muhammad was to its legal liberation framework. He left an indelible mark on the legal process and the constitution of the country indeed. Indeed, we as South Africans can be proud that our constitution is so highly regarded as a document of fairness and inclusivity. And that judge was such an integral part and driving force behind it. And here I must add, Minister Sulti, when you read his book, and that was one of the other books, In Pursuit of Justice, he was also an integral part of this. And that's why he was so passionate about making sure that this book is published. And we know, if you read his book, I would recommend it, the important role he played in ensuring that rights of individuals are respected to the nth degree in his presentations to this forum or documenting the Constitution. Now one would ask, what does OCAF South Africa do? We do many things, alhamdulillah, we're very blessed. But one of the things that we feel that's a key and important part of our role, OCAF South Africa is about sustainability. Sustainability in creating us as a community, as a blessing to the country, not a burden. And so, if you want to know more about OCAF South Africa, many things are on the internet. But one of the key roles that we play is OCAF South Africa wants to ensure we identify the key leaders. As Shamil very importantly said, we must never forget them. And those legacies, which are an endowment for us to learn from. So we have a special project called Leaders and Legacies Endowment Project. So we create endowments where we invest the funds, and we look forward to taking these funds and uplifting young future leaders, inshallah. We have supported this book, and we've also supported the commemorative monograph, which is being launched tomorrow at the Human Rights Council. This, of course, captures the story of Judge Ismail Mahomed's massive contribution, and we are certain that it will serve as a guiding light to future generations. Because what are we if we don't go back to our roots and understand what's our roots? They say a strong tree is only as strong as its roots. And the way we water these roots is information that we glean from the past. On another note, just to add one or 2 points, OCAF South Africa also has a deep desire to have a youth development project, and we've funded many thousands of young people to ensure that we uplift them in things like mathematics. But in our Leaders and Legacy project, there are many different funds, and one of them was Minister Anwar Suti was passionate about setting up an endowment on the funds we received from his book, and he said all the profits from this endowment must go toward uplifting young writers, 50% of it, and the other 50% must go towards those who are physically challenged. We also have legacies. We're not just choosing ministers or ex-ministers, we're choosing sports people, like our friend Hussein Ayub, who we know if it was not for apartheid, he would have been playing cricket for South Africa, and he would have been a legendary sportsman. But he never had that opportunity. Now, there are thousands like that. But what we do know, that Ismail Mahomed was special. 1957, he was already an advocate at the bar. Incidentally, I don't want to give my age away, I'm still 24, but that's the year I was born. You can see, already at a very young age, he was already in the bar. Incidentally, at his university, he was one of 2 that had 6 distinctions of any color. So he was par excellence already in those days. I know I'd like to share with you one story from the book that captures his personality. Look, Ismail Mahomed, without doubt, was a humble person. He had wisdom. He had love for humanity. He had loyalty. Everything he did was in service of humanity. And I think Mandela called him when he had just served 2 years as deputy president of the Constitutional Court. And Mandela had to convince him for, I believe, quite a while. And he kept putting a nice, very good argument, or let's say, you know, being a lawyer, he knew and say, no, I don't need to be in Bloemfontein. He offered him the post of Chief Justice. He denied it. He said, I don't need it. I'm very happy where I am. And of course, I'm sure in that thought process was the fact that he was reflecting on his experiences as a lawyer in Bloemfontein and all the memories that would have brought up in his life. But he was loyal. He was a comrade. He obeyed. He said, if you say I have to do it, I'll do it. And who would leave comfortable Johannesburg and Gauteng for Bloemfontein? But he went. He went out into, he was our first Black Chief Justice of South Africa. So you can see the kind of respect that he had from all parties. And on a concluding note, with respect to Ismail Mahomed, I just want to share this with you. I read a very nice saying somewhere, and I'm hoping that now our guests have arrived so I can conclude on this part of the presentation. Mandela was to the political process, sorry, I mentioned that, but Kudesa was the window to a peaceful process. And God used Judge Muhammad and others to open that window. But he was a leading voice. And that window was open mainly because they knew they could trust a man that had the wisdom, the courage of his conviction, and the deep desire to find an amicable solution for the country. From my side, I just want to thank Project Justice for being part of us, all our people at OCAF South Africa, and especially Minister Anwar Surti, and Dr. Qureshi, and of course Sumaya Surti, who's the daughter of Minister Anwar Surti. You've honored us today. Shamil, thank you for hosting us and being such a gracious host. Judge, it's so honorable to have you again here, once again joining us. Thank you so much, and all our honored guests. Thank you very much. God bless you all, and thanks for all your support. Without you, we'd not be able to do what we do. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May the peace and blessings of God be upon everyone here today, and all those. We need a greater, better South Africa. We need to rise up to the occasion and live up to our Constitution. And we pray that we continue to build on the great foundation our liberation leaders have left us. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Mr. Kala. It's good. I just play do some videos now.
He threw me out of his chambers.
Met him for the first time in 1990. And at the time, he was still a senior counsel at the Johannesburg Bar. Brilliant man. They said, that's Ismail Mahomed. So he made an exceptionally good impression on me as a leader, as a well-spoken man, well-read man, an articulate man who was politically conscious. I didn't know at the time that he had these degrees in political science, but he really came across as a man who was well-grounded in human rights and politics when I first met him.
There were many reasons why they wanted Mohammed, but one reason they told us was his incisive legal mind. He could run, as it were, through a complex legal matter with ease.
Ismail would spend hours in the prison cells where we met them. He would spend hours with them in the awaiting trial area at the courts where there were no chairs, so really he would be standing. And very, very often he shared their food. So that also struck me. He was full of jokes. You know, for a very long time, I remember these jokes. They were so clever, so smart. And while he's driving, he would crack these jokes. It was hilarious. What a lovely personality. Ismail would quote a case. He knew the title, he knew the citation, knew the page, he knew the paragraph. So I did see evidence of that. That's true. That's what I mean, that his preparation was so thorough. Nobody could challenge him on that knowledge, not even the judge.
Throughout the world, you operate and serve as a judge in neighboring countries, and all the time you walk in the steps of who? Ismail Mahomed. I go to Lesotho, I serve there as acting judge. Ismail Mahomed has been there. You look at the jurisprudence, you look at the law reports, Ismail Mahomed has been there. I go to Namibia. Today I serve as acting judge in Namibia. Who was Chief Justice there? Ismail Mahomed. Whose judgments are all over the law reports in Namibia? Ismail Mahomed. He was academically inclined. He was an advocate, senior counsel lawyer, and he was a judge of note. And that spread all over Southern Africa, and in his thinking through the speeches that he penned, his thinking is all over the world.
That was a lovely tribute. You know, that reminds me of all the work that's gone into it, but what actually stands out mostly is every single individual who has engaged with the late Chief Justice was not only so keen to share their stories with us, but when they spoke with such fondness. The memories they held so dearly to them. And as our previous speakers mentioned, what stands out for me very clearly, and I can say this as a female and as a black female post-apartheid, is how hard it is to break the barriers and the glass ceiling. So what it seems like to me was it has not been unrecognized, the value that the many firsts, like Mr. Surdi said, the late Chief Justice Ismail Mahomed has paved the way in so many areas for so many of us, in fact. The South African Human Rights Commission has also been one of our early supporters. I would like to quickly, I know we are short for time during the program, and I appreciate everybody's patience. I would like to welcome Commissioner Amir Mia on stage for a quick message of support. The South African Commission has been supporting the project, and in fact, both the biography and as well as the event tomorrow, the International Human Rights. Welcome on stage, Commissioner Amir Mia.
Thank you, Sumaya. Assalamu alaikum, greetings to everybody. I'm here with my fellow commissioner, Commissioner J.B. Sibanyoni, from the South African Human Rights Commission. And it is an honor to be here. Mr. Enver Surti, Dr. Quresh Patel, Sumaya Surti, Deputy Minister of Justice John Jeffrey, members of the judiciary, members of parliament, members of the legislature, Honorable Justice Dikgang Moseneke, academics, legal scholars, Professor Tuli Madonsela, Professor Ziad Motala, and many others. Program director, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. So I mentioned about Commissioner Sibanyoni. In 1998, Commissioner Sibanyoni and I worked for an organization called the National Institute of Public Interest Law and Research, and the acronym was NIPLA. It was a public interest law NGO that did a lot of civil rights issues, and we conferred the Duma Nokwe Human Rights Award to both Chief Justice Ismail Mahomed and Archbishop Desmond Tutu then. And we were honored and privileged to have met him in person. So then we celebrated his life and his works, and today we celebrate the man who has left a legacy in our midst. So the South African Human Rights Commission is proud to have partnered in this exciting venture with Project Trust and OCAV South Africa in celebrating the rich and powerful legacy of the late Chief Justice Ismail Mahomed and his contribution to the rule of law and to the advancement and promotion of a culture of human rights jurisprudence within the framework of a constitutional democracy in a post-apartheid South Africa. Now, the commemoration of the 20th anniversary of the passing on of the Chief Justice Ismail Mahomed could not have come at a more appropriate time in our history, and especially in the light of the fact that the South African Human Rights Commission is celebrating its 25th anniversary following its establishment in 1995. Today's launch of the biography is indeed a fitting tribute to the late Chief Justice, a philosopher of law, a man who spent his entire life in the service of the law and upholding justice and the rule of law, and who contributed immensely to laying the foundations of human rights in South Africa. The launch of the biography of the late Chief Justice today is indeed a rich resource reflecting on a life well lived in pursuit of law, justice, and morality. It comes on the eve of International Human Rights Day, a day which will be universally celebrated on the 10th of December 2020. As part of celebrating International Human Rights Day, the South African Human Rights Commission, the Project Trust, OCAV South Africa, the Office of the High Commission for Human Rights, the Department of Constitutional Development, the Foundation for Human Rights, and other civil society organizations will, amongst other activities, once again convene at the Constitutional Hill tomorrow to honor the Chief Justice Mahomed's legacy, contribution to the law, and the rich jurisprudential value he infused that underpins our constitutional democracy by launching a monograph containing commemorative essays reflecting on the law, morality, constitutional values, and the human rights ethos espoused by him during his lifetime, as he firmly believed that our constitutional democracy must speak to the protection, promotion, and advancement of the inherent dignity and worth of every individual, which is now firmly grounded as a cornerstone of our Bill of Rights, together with the values of freedom and equality in a rights-based society that we all aspire to live in. For without rights, there cannot be freedom. Without freedom, there cannot be development. Without development, there cannot be transformation nor social justice. In conclusion, Madam Program Director, a friendly reminder, the South African Human Rights Commission and its partners cordially invite all of you to join us tomorrow at Constitutional Hill on the 10th of December 2020 in celebrating International Human Rights Day on a virtual platform from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. And the details of the event are on the website of the South African Human Rights Commission. I thank you, Madam Program Director.
Thank you, Commissioner Mumia. Break the video. We're just going to run a quick clip.
He threw me out of his chambers once because I was late one Saturday night, and we were working on a matter, and he asked me what I thought was an absolutely trite issue, like authority for why a contract is binding, I think it was, and then I'd said to him, "That's Ismail, that's trite," and then he said, "Nothing is trite. Nothing is trite. Get out of my chambers." And he chased me out. I was more than happy to leave at 10 o'clock on Saturday. I left the other counsel and other attorneys there who looked at me with despair as I left. He wouldn't speak to me for 2 weeks. But I take back from that is really, as a lawyer, every legal proposition is contestable. And it meant that in unpicking and finding an argument, it meant that propositions that had been in our law since the 1920s, for example, that an employment contract is not you can't have specific performance for an employment contract. He unpicked that, and that resulted in a really very important case of National Union of Textile Workers versus Stag Packings. We persuaded the full bench that indeed Ski wrote this particular case did not enunciate a legal principle, but enunciated the types of factors that ought to be taken into account when you exercise the discretion, which is how he had taken. And by the way, there were a long line of cases that had followed Ski wrote through the 30s and 40s and 50s. Yes, that's the measure of the man. And look, he was irascible. It wasn't always easy. And he was very nervous before he went to court, which has always surprised me because once he stood up, it looked like there was no nervousness at all. It was just, he was articulate. He was brilliant, yeah. He was an utterly brilliant counsel.
It is now our special privilege and honor to introduce you to our keynote speaker, retired Deputy Chief Justice Dikgang Moseneke. Did I say retired though? I know that he is a leader of an important delegation to Lesotho, that he has published his excellent book called All Rise, and that he spent 4 months lecturing in the States before the onset of COVID-19. That doesn't sound retired to me at all. Justice Moseneke at 15 was sentenced and sent to Robben Island for 10 years. While doing hard labor and fighting for equality and freedom, he completed 2 degrees, and on his release completed his LLB, which was banned, when he was banned. He's a highly respected advocate, highly respected judge, and highly respected justice. He served for 12 years in the Constitutional Court and brought about constitutional transformation. A chapter, in fact, is dedicated in the biography of Ismail Mahomed to Deputy Chief Justice Moseneke. We invite Deputy Chief Justice Moseneke on stage to address us. Welcome and thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Good evening. I have a few speaking notes. I don't have a text. I'm not going to keep you the whole evening here. Let me start right away by expressing my deep recognition of the deep privilege of being asked to be here this evening. Let me start by thanking the Project Justice Trust. Mr. Kala, and you and your colleagues, this is a task well worth our while. You remember, it's not the first time that I say these praises to the Project Justice Trust. I did at UNISA at another occasion which was hosted by yourselves. And on that occasion, we're launching the book of my brother and comrade Enver Mohammed Surti, and the job seems to go on because now here we have Chief Justice Ismail Mahomed initiative, and this is something wonderful. May I upfront congratulate you for tomorrow, International Human Rights Day, and locating Chief Justice Ismail Mahomed to where he properly belongs. And it is therefore a very singular privilege to be able to be here. And I have no big bombastic things that judges have to say. I'm going to say a few things, and I know that I have 15 minutes in which to do it, there being colleagues behind me. I think my first gratitude must certainly go to, as I've said earlier, my brother, comrade, and friend, Mohammed Enver Surti, our former MP. When he is happy and relaxed, he reminds me that he was the chief whip of the ANC in Parliament. Then he comes up and says, "Don't forget, I was the Minister of Justice." Of course I wouldn't forget, Enver. How could I? And Enver's short-lived position as Minister of Justice was caused by me in many ways. A person called Jacob Zuma, who was our past president, asked Enver Surti, "Who do you think should become Chief Justice?" And he shut his mouth and said, "Dikgang Musineke," and he was fired. There was a cabinet reshuffle and he lost his job instantly. And in my book, I describe how he said to me he thought he was in hell. And I said, "No, you're in a snake pit. And at least you managed to get out of the pit alive, Enver. But congratulations and very well done." Excuse me. Extremely well done for this hard work. I was living side by side with you and I saw how much you have put into it. I must go to Dr. Koresh Patel, that incisive public intellectual. We met briefly in the heated 1960s, right in the middle of battle and struggle against an evil regime, and I am rather delighted that you were part of the project, and I have read your beautiful and thoughtful writing, and for this I'm truly grateful, not only for myself, but also for Chief Justice Ismail Mahomed. Let me start by reminding you that Ismail and I were homeboys. I assure you I'm fine. I've got a nasal drip that comes in my way all the time I try to speak. Chief Justice Ismail Mahomed and I were homeboys. I came from Attridgeville and he came from Laudium. And if you go to chapter 5 of the book, you'll see a bit of a description where Enver Surti tries to make a comparison between myself and the great thinker and leader of our profession. He obviously is mistaken. He shouldn't be making that kind of comparison. But let me start off this little tribute, and I promise you I won't be long, by recalling one of our leading ideologues and thinkers in this country, And he says about remarkable people, true leadership demands complete subjugation of the self and absolute honesty, integrity, and the uprightness of character, courage and fearlessness, and above all, a consuming love of one's people. And the quote ends. Predictably, that public thinker is Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe. But these words are totally opposite if you remember Chief Justice Mahomed. I knew him rather closely. I was one of his understudies. And I often, in my moment of fancy and fairy, I think that I've copied quite a bit from him personally. And I dubbed myself one of his early charges. I was his junior, possibly more than many black counsel at the bar. And therefore I spent many, many hours with him. And about him, I'm quite comfortable to say I've penned 2 paragraphs. The one, in one I say every nation, every people, every country, from time to time yields from amongst its very own a truly courageous, selfless, and visionary patriot who stands tall and apart from the rest. As she or he passes on, the rest of us would know that it was a life well lived. It was a life worthy of celebration. We want to remember great lives for many reasons. First, they are beacons and signposts of public history. Great lives light up the collective path we have traveled. They locate us within our past and shared experiences. There's another forward-looking reason for celebrating a great life. From that life, we hope to learn how to live our own lives. We call to memory their visionary and selfless action in order to gird our loins for the difficult task of creating, reimagining, and improving our world. We hope to extract from their brave deeds those abiding values of how best to accomplish the present-day challenges of our world. Of course, we also remember the departed greats for no more than to thank them for their sacrifices they've made to make our lives bearable and better. And when I penned these paragraphs this afternoon, I was in deep emotion to think about what Chief Justice Ismail Mahomed really was. Early pathfinder, a person of color, in inimical circumstances. Only his brilliance could really break all of the stupid barriers that were put up. We're at court, and you can read about that in my interview, and he looks at me. We both have gowns, and the toilets were marked blancas and ni blancas. You remember that kind of rubbish? And he looks at me and says, "Tikhang, I wonder what do white people do in the toilet?" Now that's a typical Ismail Mahomed-like cutting thought, to say we cannot be more human and equal humans as we sit in the toilet, and yet they have these stupid tags about blanca and ni blanca. And in it was that anger of exclusion. And those who were in many ways inferior and way less than Ismail Mahomed, with his towering intellect, with his philosophical bend, and with his deep, deep humanity to serve. You've heard Justice Yvonne Mokgoro talk about how he straddled across this subcontinent to make a contribution. and a deep commitment that he had a background of his own, but essentially he was in Africa, an African, and part of the task that had to be accomplished at the time. So I am grateful and stand up here to be thankful, Ismail Mahomed. Those evenings that he used to stride across his chambers and dictate with amazing brilliance particular parts of the heads of argument we had to argue when Zwelakhe Sisulu was charged for refusing to disclose sources of his article about members of the African National Congress who chose to cross the country to go abroad. And you should have been there to see it. And I try and say it in my interview. And Ismail rises in this court, now 3 white males, old Afrikaner, and clearly prejudiced and racist. And he rises with me, and we 2 black men in the court, and charged Zwelakhe Sisulu. So in many ways, there's an inimical arrangement between the bench and us. And Ismail Mahomed rises and say, "May it please the cause, my lords. I have 2 points to make, and if they're not good, that's the end of my case." But there we go. Then he raises this 1 point about the requirements of Section 179 and the prerequisites before conviction. By the time we're halfway the hearing, 2 of the 3 judges were well on our side. In all circumstances, totally inimical. It was just the sheer brilliance, the strength of his argument, the deep sense of humanity, and his deep quest for justice and goodness. And lo and behold, we got Zwelakhe Sisulu off. On that very day, the judges said, the conviction is set aside and reasons will follow. Now just imagine that gap that Ismail Mahomed narrows down. And just by the hard work that comes with it, the brilliance, the excellence, the dedication. Remember that quote that I just gave you when I opened up. So we're grateful for his life. And I'd like to turn to my colleagues. I'm truly, Mohammed Nafsa, Nathan, I'm truly, truly chuffed and so happy to see so many of our colleagues coming out to write and pay tribute to Chief Justice Ismail Mahomed, the first black Chief Justice of this country. He almost went unsung, at least not by his family and those who were close to him, but certainly by our profession. And it was quite critical that this project gets done. And the big statement about it was almost us forgetting our heroes, those who matter most in our lives. And that is something that previously oppressed people tend to do, to almost minimize the greatness of their own and fail to elevate them to where they are. But I've seen all the colleagues who have come through, and I'm grateful for that. The judiciary, the academy, practicing lawyers, activists, and ever so many people coming out to write about this hero. Something we should have done many, many years. It's a belated tribute, but it's a rich one and a full one, and we should be proud for what we have done. The last point I really would like to make, before I say Assalamu alaikum, I really would like to make this point. We as a nation have changed who our heroes are. They're in social media, they're in newspapers, on television. And usually they are of the variety that wills political power. And often they would have flashy cars for money they've never worked for. But with voluble emptiness about what is worth celebrating in life. And we've allowed it to happen. I was talking the other day if you walked up to young people and say, do you know any black nuclear physicist? Do you know any professor, a person of color, who is a heart surgeon, outstanding heart surgeon? They almost will never be able to say it. Do you know, I mean, you can go on and on and on in fields of great achievements in our lives. And we have to rethink, what are we conveying to our children, to our country? Totally rudderless, ideology, bereft people, sometimes belief-bereft people with no faith, and floating around and fighting about money and positions and seeming importance. And therefore, as we celebrate Ismail Mahomed, I thought we should remember that important thing and continue to insist that people like Ismail Mahomed are our heroes, and we are the ones who must write about them, Enver. And if we don't, it will be the story of the hunter and the lion. The hunter telling all the stories of glory. So in many ways, those are the words that I really wanted to say. And to you, together with Koresh Patel, this is an awesome thing that we must continue to do, and to celebrate something of Ismail's stature. Let me leave you with a party note, and I write about it in All Rise. Nelson Mandela announces the Constitutional Court and its leadership, and Ismail Mahomed is not the President or the Chief Justice. It hurt. And I'm not being controversial, I've been written about it, it hurt. And we who were activists who anticipated a court that would be integrated and that would find a leader in that arm of state, and Ismail Mahomed was an obvious choice. And Nelson Mandela came to know of that. Some of us made sure that he knew of it, of heard of it. And in many ways explained him emerging as Chief Justice and the first black Chief Justice of this country. And justice was done in our field in that sense. That was important for us to be able to assert our very own, given all the talents that he has. Again, I am grateful, and I'm going to sit down now. And as I do, I think it's appropriate for me to say peace and mercy and blessings of Allah be upon all of you. I thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Justice. You've given us so much to think about. I'd like to now welcome onto stage our panelists, Professor Madonsela. I know all our panelists were running quite late, and I hope they have arrived already. Judge Nafsa, Professor Matala, and Anisa Mohammed. Please join me on stage. Thank you. Yeah, that's fine. It's there. Hi, Anisa. If you don't mind sitting on the third chair. Professor Matala, if you don't mind sitting on this chair, and then because Professor we able to lower the lights a little bit? The lights. I'd like to start off by quickly thanking our panelists for giving their time for this event. I also want to just quickly get out of the way some of the logistics. I know Professor Marunsela has rushed in, flown in for the event, and we sincerely appreciate it, and needs to rush off again soon after. She has a flight to catch. What we're going to do is I'll obviously introduce the panel. I will first then pose the questions to Professor Marunsela because of the time constraint and of the flight she has to catch, and then we'll move on to the rest of the panelists, if that's okay with the panelists. Thank you very much. So now we have a very interesting segment. Our very special and distinguished invited guests, we have Judge Mohammed Nafsa, a very highly respected judge from the Supreme Court of Appeal, on my left here. We've got Professor Ziad Mutala, head of School of Law from Harvard University. We have Anissa Mohammed, senior attorney and chairperson of Golden Hayes Malachi Incorporate. And we have, of course, Professor Thuli Marunsela, professor of law and chair of social justice, University of Stellenbosch. And of course, we can't forget our former courageous public protector. I'd like to welcome you and thank you most kindly for accepting our invitation to be part of this panel discussion. So, Professor Marunsela, we'll just quickly start with you, if you don't mind. And it's quite an informal process. Oh, apologies. Professor Marunsela, you first worked with Ismail Mahomed when he was the chairperson of the South African Law Commission. Can you share your impressions about him?
Thank you. Hello?
Yes, thank you.
Firstly, I just would like to congratulate project leader Enver Seti for completing this incredibly important project and to express my gratitude to everyone for the privilege to be here. My impressions of Chief Justice Ismail Mahomed are the same as what former DCJ Museneke said. Basically, I think I share the same views of everyone, that he was the epitome of what they say when they say that, what they mean when they say the best antidote to discrimination is excellence. He was excellent in every way. It's been said that he was intelligent and well-read, but he worked hard. And if he was expecting high standards of others, it was because that is what he imposed on himself. So that was the first impression I had of him when we were in the project committee on the harmonization of customary law, well, harmonization of indigenous law. The other thing that I got was a sense that he was deeply committed to justice, to substantive justice, not just formal justice. Hence, a lot of what he said to us was about reconciling law and justice, given the fact that we came from a society where there was such a gap between the two. And lastly, a commitment to service. I would say the commitment to service to me didn't come through when I was in the commission, because we mostly just had him chairing the meetings. We didn't do groundwork together. It was when he was Chief Justice and I was working in the Department of Justice on transformation matters that I realized that Number one, when he spoke about an egalitarian society in S versus Makwanyane, he was prepared to live by those principles.
Thank you, Professor Madonsela. I mean, leaders that lead by example, we need more leaders like that. Those are the ones you can learn from the most. You touched a bit about, which also speaks to your most interesting article in the commemorative book, where you speak about bridging the gap between law and justice. You mentioned how Ismail Mahomed was equally committed to reconciling law and morality, law, morality, and justice. Can you share more about that and your thoughts with us in that regard?
Well, you can see that coming across again when you read his judgment in S versus Makwanyane, that during apartheid, there was such a gap between law and justice. There was such a gap between law and morality. And he talks there about how the Constitution sought to break with the past, which was a society of entrenched discrimination, inequality, and a society where the violation of human dignity was sanctioned by the law. I had an opportunity to work with him when we were working on the Customer Service Charter. You will recall that under Zola Square in the Public Service Commission, they decided that the courts too should have a Customer Service Charter. And we worked with them to look at what could be the court standards. And my lasting impression of him was him addressing one event where we were, the heads of courts were there and we were all there. And although he spoke a lot about justice, but on that day, his focus was on the privilege to serve, on the approach to justice, not just as a dimension of the law, but the approach to justice is an opportunity to serve humanity in pursuit of human dignity. I seem to recall that he even quoted at some stage from Khalil Gibran in The Prophet about work, service, and getting joy out of working in service to humanity.
That's wonderful. Are there any closing remarks you'd like to make before we release you, Professor Madonsela, so that you can make your flight? You can go for it.
I do want to say it's not really the first time he's being honored, although he hasn't been honored the way he deserves. I do recall that the Law Commission had the Ismail Mahomed essay, and when I went back to the commission now as a full-time commissioner, we revived that. And among the things that emerged from student essays was an essay that was looking at the casualization of labor through, oh God, I apologize. And that essay kickstarted a discussion around the casualization of labor, and we sent it to Parliament. Eventually, there was law reform based on those essays. I know that the Law Commission has renamed that under Justice Pius Langa. I do think then that the Human Rights Commission, it would be a good thing if it revives that essay and renames it and still maintains the name of Justice Ismail Mahomed. My reason for that is the same reason that was given by Justice Museneke. That is not just about him, really. It's about every child who feels that the world is not yielding to their humanity. To understand that they should not then focus on the wrongs that the world is visiting on them. They can focus on the fact that they're here for a reason, the fact that they still can make a difference, and that they can rise above those humble beginnings and even prove to those that ill-treat them that the circumstances of your birth and the way you look should not determine your place in society and should not determine your contribution to humanity. Thank you.
Such wonderful words. Thank you, Professor Madonsela. You're welcome to leave if you need to. We do understand, and we sincerely appreciate that you've come all the way and have to rush straight into the car now to catch the flight. Thank you very much. Move on to you, Judge Nafsa. You worked with Chief Justice Ismail Mahomed in the Legal Resources Center. You also worked with him as an advocate, and you also appeared before him when he was a judge. That's 3 different contexts. Can you share your impressions of him with us?
Yes. I greet you in the universal greeting of peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ismail always greeted me with Khuda Hafiz. I think you'd know that. Never ever without saying Khuda Hafiz. Project Justice, Awqaf, Inver, Quresh, thank you for this real privilege of being able to make a small contribution towards recognition, the proper recognition of Ismail. I looked at the photograph on the book, and I see a photograph in the corridors of the SCA every other day when I'm in Bloemfontein, and it's much too calm, isn't it? Ismail was intense. He was just such an intense person who gave of himself. He was an irresistible force. He was someone you had to acknowledge. And let me say about this occasion, and let me say this about the book to Quresh and to Enver. It's about time. It is about time. And it's something that Dihang, I had the good fortune, my generation had the good fortune of having both you and Ismail as role models. And for those of us who believe in black consciousness truisms, as you did and as we did, and as I do, I think Thuli Madonsela said something about it. We don't recognize our own enough. Those who had recognition or gained recognition as the great forensic lawyers of our time, the great judges of our time, were those who had privileged backgrounds. They didn't have to overcome disadvantage. They didn't have to overcome straitened circumstances. Ismail and Dihang, in very different ways and in similar ways, made a contribution. Dihang gave up his young life with his eyes burning with a fierce desire for the liberation of his people, and then turned to law. For Ismail, it was always about the law. It was the law, the law, the law. It consumed him. It was something he lived for. But he strove for excellence. So if you're asking me as a young advocate what I took away from Ismail and Dihang both practiced at a time, as did we, my generation, when there were no affirmative action measures. In fact, there were oppressive measures. Those are the things that you had to overcome. Standing up in courts that were hostile, finding space in the law that was incredibly narrow. Grounds for challenge, avenues of challenge were incredibly limited. Ismail found them. And we didn't celebrate him enough, and we don't celebrate him enough, and we don't recognize him enough. And this must just be the first. I have a couple of suggestions at the end about how we can do it and what we should do. The things that stands out for me is that if you're asking me for lessons, Ismail was not seduced by power. He spoke truth to power, no matter who was in power. He was, and if there's a lesson for us to take away, is don't be tempted, don't be seduced by the corrosive effects of power improperly used simply because you think you can win influence and gain position. He believed too much in himself. If there's another lesson I learned from Ismail, it's when you face this kind of adversity, you've got to have a strong personality. You've got to stand up to the system. You've got to stand up to oppression. You've got to stand up to the magistrates. You've got to stand up to the judges. Consistency. He'd say to me, as Anissa will testify, and Ismail, like many of those of us who have ancestry from the subcontinent, his hand gestures were famous. And he'd turn and he'd say to me, bang, if you are inconsistent, if you don't live up to your principles, there is a record. There is a living record. If it's not written, it will live in your community. They know who you are. When you die one day, people will look back at you. They'll know whether you were a sellout. They will know whether you were on the side of the vulnerable. They will know whether you're on the side of the marginalized. And he kept that. That was who he was. When Ismail Mahomed left us too soon, way too soon, can anybody have said about him that he sold his soul? Can anybody have said about him that he sold out? Can anybody say about him that he allowed himself to be patronized? And I think that that was the strength, and that's what we took away as young lawyers. He had an unstinting and an unyielding fidelity to the law, the rule of law. For him, that was all that mattered. He used to say to me repeatedly, when you fight the system, maintain your integrity. It's incredibly difficult to maintain your integrity and to deal with matters in a way where the judges who don't like you, who are hostile towards you, who are racist, recognize that you're a person of integrity, a person whose word they can take. He said that to me over and over and over again. So if you're asking me as a young lawyer, those are the lessons. Those are the lessons we can take now. Be faithful, be a true patriot, understand that you're here to serve, you're here to serve those who are underprivileged, those who are at the cutting edge, at the coalface of oppression. Those are the lessons I take away from Ismail's life.
Thank you so much, Judge Nefsa. That's brilliant. Professor Matala, what stood about Ismail Mahomed when you met him?
So first, I want to also say it's an absolute honor to be part of this occasion to celebrate the life and the jurisprudence of one of South Africa's greatest lawyers. I also want to thank Anwar and Quraish and your team for the dedication and energy that you have brought to this long overdue project. The last time I met Chief Justice Ismail Mahomed was on the occasion of the 50th anniversary celebration of the World Court, which I had helped put together in Cape Town. And there were two things from that event that stands out and I think reinforce a lot of what has been said today in terms of his character. Judge Nafsa, you said not seduced by power, and I think there's one incident from there that confirms that. On that occasion, there were probably about 7 or 8 judges from the International Court of Justice, including the president and the vice president of the court. And I was sitting next to Ismail Mahomed at the front of the seminar venue, and somebody had asked a question to the president of the International Court of Justice with regard to the low workload of that court. The International Court of Justice decides something in the order of 4 to 5 contentious cases a year and about 1 advisory opinion. And the president was unable to provide a satisfactory answer. And in the inimitable fashion that was so unique to Ismail, he uttered, and I'm sure a number of the judges were within earshot, what a lazy bunch. Now, that was Ismail Mahomed. Someone that had no tolerance for slackers, someone that was in haste to get on with the job. The second thing from that occasion that stands out to me. When I came to sit next to him, Ismail had his shoes, he had removed his shoes and he had set it on the floor. And I looked at him, and he said he was experiencing severe back pain, and that removing his shoes alleviated to some measure his pain. And when I reflect on that, I mean, to those of us that come from the Muslim or an Asian background, removing our shoes is a very natural thing. And I reflect on that. Now, undoubtedly, I think it might have been his back pain as a consequence of his cancer. I don't know. But when I reflect on that and I look at what he tells us in the case of Ahmaud, where the ethos and the mores and the values of the previous order is not going to define who we are. And the ethos and the mores and the values of the old order are no longer going to marginalize and subjugate people. I think those were two very telling incidents for me in our last encounter.
Thank you so much, Professor Matala. That was a very interesting story. Anissa Mahomed, this must be a very proud moment for you as a senior lawyer and the niece of Chief Justice Ismail Mahomed. Can you share some insights about your experience as Ismail Mahomed, the family man?
Thank you very much. On behalf of the Mahomed family, I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to thank Uncle Anwar now to me,
yes,
and Dr. Q, as I have him in my mind, for putting together this wonderful, wonderful, long overdue tribute to my uncle. He was more than an uncle, he was my father. And from that perspective, each one of us who sit here are overwhelmed with the emotion of seeing him deserve richly what he worked so tirelessly for. The acknowledgement that he receives today is long overdue, and we are extremely appreciative that it has been showcased as it has tonight. Ismail Mahomed, the family man. Before I sort of give you that insight, I want to touch on something that Judge Nafsa said just now. And he said something along the lines of, Ismail Mahomed said, you don't bow your head to anybody. And it reminds me of a story he told me many, many years ago. He had been appointed to serve on the bench, I think it was Swaziland. And he said to me, I have a problem. And I said, what's your problem? And he says, I'm told that when you go and see the king, you approach him on your knees. And I have a problem with that. So I said, well, what are you going to do about it if that is protocol? And he said, I've said to them, I will go to the king and I will show deference, but I don't bow to anyone other than my creator. And that was Ismail Mahomed. So whether you were king or pauper, you got treated with dignity because you were a human being and not for any other reason. Having said so, you might many people know that we knew him as Ba. He was universally known through the community as Ba. And I need not extol his values. We know what he stood for. But as a family man, we perhaps did not appreciate him in the same way that other members of the community did, because we took him for granted. And in a way, some of his teachings were imbued to us through osmosis. We never learned them, but we knew what was right or wrong. When Ba was upset with you, you knew. The frown said it all. But he, like any other man, was a husband, a father, a brother. And he had the same fears that any other person may have. He had the fears of safety and security for his family. He had the same ideals that any other person who is worried about secure society for their families would have. But his fears, which were perfectly legitimate and normal, often played out in the public arena. In the book, there is a mention of an incident when my father, Anwar, was arrested at the age of 17 and charged with sedition for asking people to oppose the apartheid state. And he was arrested for it. My grandmother didn't tell Ismail about this because Ismail was out of town. And when he returned some day or two later, she told him about my dad's arrest. And Ismail immediately made haste to go to the police station where he was being held. And I'm told that the security branch were there. So this was no ordinary holding of a juvenile. This was a little bit more than that. And when he realized what was at play, he brought his formidable mind to try and secure his brother's release. And the security branch were having none of it. And finally he screamed at them. And he said, "It's me you want, let my brother go." And in that moment, Ismail was nothing more than a brother that feared for his brother's safety, and a son who had realized he was going to have to tell his mother that he didn't bring the other son home. That was Ismail Mahomed. But more so, and perhaps on a lighter note, in the book there is a mention of him taking all the children eat shopping. That was a biannual expedition. And he would take us personally every year, buy eat clothes for us. And one of the other reasons, as Professor Motala said, he used to take off his shoes. Many people don't know, but he suffered from agonizing burning feet. I sometimes wonder how he could stand up in court for those many hours and make those arguments. So when we would go on these shopping expeditions, he would find a bench and perch himself there with a newspaper or a book and sort of while away the time. And you might remember at some point in time there was this wonderful concept store that we now take for granted, where the bookstore opened with the attached coffee shop. And that year, Exclusive Books had opened up with that concept store in the Eastgate Mall. And as he prepared to look around for a suitable bench, I said to him, no, I'm going to take you somewhere else. And protesting mildly because of the torture I'm about to put him through, taking him through the maze of corridors, he comes with me. And I said to him, he says, "Where are you taking me?" I said, "No, wait, you'll like this." And I took him to the bookstore, and I said to him, "Here's an endless supply of books, and here's an endless supply of tea. I'll see you later." And true, after many hours of shopping, when I went and I tapped him on the shoulder, I was met with this broad smile. And he said, "This is a wonderful place." And from that day on, our shopping expeditions featured this coffee shop with a bookstore attached.
That's wonderful.
And that is the bar that we knew. And that is the bar that we miss.
Thank you so much, Anissa. Judge Nafsa, what do you think is the greatest contribution that Chief Justice Ismail Mahomed made to the judiciary and to jurisprudence in general?
I'd like to start with a story that really is a tribute to Ismail by Sidney Kentridge. He speaks of a international congress in Salzburg, and it was Ismail's first introduction as Chief Justice to an international audience, and there had people there from the House of Lords, and there had people from the US, there had people everywhere else, and I think it was the president of the European Court who made the opening address, and he spoke in conventional lawyer terms about what a judge does and what a judge's powers are. And Ismail spoke the next day. And Ismail spoke with an elegance and a passion that was foreign to all of these people, because for them, the law was sterile. It was clinical, and you applied it. And Sidney says in this article, which you can find in The Advocate, it's in the year 2000, he says, Ismail electrified the place. Now, Anissa will know he loved language. I was at a meeting with him once with judges, I think it was from Bangladesh, and he spoke to them about his love of the way Bengali would be spoken and his love of Urdu. And what Sidney says is that Ismail, and perhaps I should just read that part of the speech so you can understand exactly what, when people say Ismail was eloquent, it's almost as if it's disparaging, as if that was all that there was to him, that he spoke flowery language. And I think it's true to say that those of us who come from the subcontinent are not small on words. we are drama kings in very many ways. And it may have something to do with the language. I mean, I was thinking about something that somebody said, you know, when you speak in Hindi or you speak in Urdu, bahut, badi baat karta hu. You got to emphasize it. But the thing about Ismail was that it wasn't just language. And this is what Sydney says in the article. He says, I'm sorry, I need to. His eloquence was not mere facility with words. Although he was a master of the English language, rather it was part of his deep commitment to individual rights and his real feeling for the law. His lifelong goals were freedom and equality, but he always believed that the way to those goals and their best protection was achieved with the law and the judicial process. He believed that fervently. So we can look at all of his judgments. They're all in the book. You can look at all of his speeches, and they all reflect the same thing. But I think Anissa said something important. We sort of don't always recognize the small things that made him human and that projected into his view of the world. I know that he loved his mother. I heard him speak countless times on public platforms, and he always found a way of injecting his mother into that conversation. And I think he felt a deep affection for her, and he felt, therefore he felt very strongly about the equality of women. So you can talk about Kodesa, you can talk about all the other things, but I'd like to come back to something that I started with. And it's really Dikgang and Ismail in tandem in a way. And Judge Ponen will relate to this because we all, as I said before, believed in BC truisms. Ismail's real gift to us was that he was a role model. He was something we could model ourselves on. We understood his honesty, we understood his integrity, we understood an unbridled passion for the law that even in incredibly narrow circumstances, the law can be majestic. And so if you ask me about Ismail and what we can do for the future, and perhaps I won't hold until concluding remarks, these might well be mine, I think that we've got to have an annual lecture. We've got to make sure that law schools understand the importance of the first black Chief Justice, one who was not a token Chief Justice, one who was a person of substance, of integrity, who had a forensic mind beyond description. We've got to start ensuring that there is some kind of, you have the annual Brown-Fisher lecture. You should have each university have an annual Ismail Mahomed lecture where we can celebrate his life, we can talk about what he meant, we can talk about why he is the shining star that he is. So for me, you think about the other thing that he brought to us. One of the things that Mr. Kala didn't speak about, or I think it was Dikgang, about how he traveled to Bloemfontein. One of the things he sometimes did was he had to go to Kimberley and sleep over in Kimberley and then travel by train the next day. I got to know Ismail over 20 years now. Elton Cheadle was quite funny in his description of Ismail, but it was a very realistic description. There's a story, and I don't know if it's apocryphal or if it's true, about a senior counsel, much celebrated, who, and it's not disparaging of this counsel because Ismail treated us all that way, who had presented heads of argument, and Ismail had kept on sending him back to have it redone. And eventually he brought it back and he said, there's only one question to be asked here. This is getting worse and worse. Every time I send you, it comes back worse. But this purports to be drawn by counsel. So it obviously isn't. So the only question is, who drew it? And that was Ismail. So he gave us, Ismail, I think, wherever you are, and for those of us who are Muslim, I think Ismail represents the Sunnah in the best possible way. You serve Allah by serving humanity. You serve Allah by being selfless. You serve Allah by being incredibly brave. And when Anissa talked about him putting himself out there, he was unafraid. And I think that's the one thing, you know, having to go into courts in different sort of whites and non-white sections, having to deal with magistrates who had no time for you. And if you were an advocate and you were black, you were met, Dikgang will tell you, It's almost if you didn't have on a gown and you came in with a suit and tie into a magistrate's court, it was a red rag to a bull. So, Ismail, wherever you are, we love you. We're sorry we don't always appreciate you as much as we can. You're not here. The poor, the vulnerable, the marginalized are still with us. We're sorry that your light isn't here to shine on us and to help us. You know, it's a funny thing about South Africa. We keep on saying always, we're at a critical juncture in our history. We seem to be in a perpetual critical juncture in our history. But we are. And so, Ismail, I love you. We love you. Khuda Hafiz.
Thank you so much. That was lovely, Judge Nefsa. I think because of time constraint, if you don't mind and you're comfortable with that too, maybe I'll ask the second question, and if you'd like to add on to that your closing remarks, as Judge Nefsa has done as well, and then we could conclude the panel discussion. So Professor Mutala, Ismail Mahomed introduced a value and context-based approach to interpretation of the law. Can you please explain in plain language how he achieved that, and then close with your closing remarks?
Thanks, Sumaya. It's one thing to say that the courts are the ultimate arbiter over our Constitution, but it's more important to look at how the judges go about interpreting the Constitution. The early judicial imprints that Ismail laid, and to me, I think one of the seminal opinions with regard to the early cases is his majority opinion in the Mushlungu case, where he lays out this important proposition that every provision in the Constitution has to be interpreted against the Bill of Rights and against other provisions in the Constitution. I think that carried the day in the Mushlungu case and has largely come to define the way the majority of the judges view constitutional interpretation in terms of provisions that might conflict with rights under the Bill of Rights. There's a very important statement that Ismail lays out in the Makanyani case, and I cannot paraphrase it, but I think any textbook on judicial interpretation that the interpretive community of scholars want to understand what the judicial enterprise entails must begin with that pronouncement that Ismail lays out in the Makanyani case. So pardon me, I'm going to quote it because I cannot capture it in my own words, where he states, "The relevant provisions of the Constitution, their text and their context, the interplay between different provisions, legal precedent relevant to the resolution of the problem, both in South Africa and abroad, the domestic common law and public international law impacting on its possible solution, factual and historical considerations bearing on the problem, the significance and meaning of the language used in the relevant provisions, the content and the sweep of the ethos expressed in the structure of the Constitution, the balance to be struck between different and sometimes potentially conflicting considerations reflected in its text, and by a judicious interpretation and assessment of all of these factors to determine what the Constitution permits and what it prohibits." And when we take a look at his opinions, he calibrated this differently in each of the opinions he penned. One imagines that if one had access to his thinking, Ismail will tell us that a judge must be deeply embedded in context, and having that understanding informs the meaning that he or she gives to the rule. And to me, that is why his pronouncement in Mushlungu is so important. Mushlungu pertained to a majority opinion that was penned by Ismail and a minority opinion that was penned by Kentridge. If I might add, two of probably this country's leading jurists or scholars. And there we see this dialectic between the two in terms of constitutional interpretation. The provision pertained to the interpretation of a particular provision under the interim constitution. And Judge Kentridge writing for the minority that included Arthur Shaskilson, subscribed to the view that if the words in the text were very clear, if you have precedent that has interpreted these words in other contexts, then you are bound to apply that understanding with regard to the interpretation of that provision of the Constitution. And that to the extent that that might have brought hardship to certain individuals, the legislature and the executive branch of government also take an oath to uphold the Constitution. They can go back and adopt the appropriate laws to remedy the problem. Ismail, on the other hand, adopts what I'm going to characterize as a vision that posits this view that a judge has to perform their function as a noble guard, as an intermediary between the legislature and the executive to ensure that tyranny is not visited on the population. And in that regard, he doesn't look at text as dispositive. I'm reminded of the comment that Hilton Cheadle made, that there is no one answer. It really depends on your methodology and your method of interpretation. And he goes on to say that previous precedents that interpret this is not going to guide us, that really we need to come up with a new understanding that is tethered to the ethos and values of this new Constitution. And adopting that approach, he pretty much rejects a literalist approach to the Constitution and really announced this very important principle, that every provision in the Constitution has to be interpreted against the ethos and the values that are contained in the Bill of Rights, and that they have to be reconciled with the fundamental precepts of human rights as contained in the Bill of Rights. Difference of opinion between Kentridge and Ismail. Kentridge is of the view that you only have the liberty to adopt that approach if the text is not clear. If the text is clear, then you've got to follow the text, and that should be dispositive. Ismail's approach, on the other hand, is no. The purposive, teleological approach, looking at the overall purpose of the Constitution, is a cardinal norm that underpins every interpretation that the court undertakes. And I think that was an extremely important precedent in terms of setting the trajectory of how judges evaluate and go about this task of constitutional interpretation. I am going to end by saying that if we have to say that under the previous order, parliamentary supremacy represented the predominant constitutional Grundnorm, if I have to reflect on the litany of opinions that Ismail rendered in that short period of time, I would posit that Ismail's view is that the supreme Grundnorm under our Constitution is judicial review. Now, why do I come to this opinion? In one of the cases, he expounds on this idea, and some would say it's a very radical proposition, that even if Parliament adopts a constitutional amendment following all the requisite constitutional procedure, and if that constitutional amendment conflicts with certain higher norms, he would go down the path of ruling that that constitutional amendment itself is invalid. This notion of an unconstitutional constitutional amendment, which gives us access to his thinking with regard to what I think for him was so important. This notion of the judiciary serving as a noble guard, and that noble guard goes beyond even a constitutional amendment to the extent that it conflicts with fundamental human rights norms. Really pretty much reflecting what his life was all about, dedicated to human dignity, dedicated to the upliftment of the victimized, the marginalized. We are forever indebted to the jurisprudence that he provided to us in that short period of time where he sat on the Constitutional Court as well as in the Supreme Court of Appeal, the very important pronouncement in Ahmad that vestiges of the past will not continue in the present. And I would, in the interest of time, end it there. If you want me to say more, I will. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Professor Motala. And I think, on that note, my final question to you, Anissa, and you can also include your concluding remarks. As Professor Motala, ended with, Chief Justice Ismail Mahomed was always conscious of inequality and poverty. Can you share some of your thoughts about his views in relation to socio-economic rights to improve the conditions of society?
Thank you, Sumaya. I think Professor Motala has exposed beautifully on the jurisprudence and thinking of Ismail Mahomed. But I think that thinking comes from the fact that he himself grew up in hardship and poverty and had humble beginnings. And I think, therefore, the human condition of someone's dignity who is always stripped bare and the experiences that he suffered under apartheid constantly shaped his view to bring about a more egalitarian society. And from that perspective, I think, given the passion that he had for the law, as it was said so many times, it consumed him. And it was because he was able to manipulate, and I use that term advisedly, the law in so many different ways, that it became the tool through which he sought to bring about the utopian society that he always envisaged, where human dignity and opportunities for all were the center of his thinking when solving problems. It's very easy to simply say that I'm going to give a judgment. I'm a judge. I'm here as an arbiter of a dispute. But with Ismail, it went a little bit further than that. It was not just about being correct in law. It was about being just. And there's a difference between the two. The one is that you can be technically correct. Imposing apartheid laws was technically correct. It was done by the judiciary for years. But was it just? No, it wasn't. And it's at that point that you start seeing Ismail starting to shape the law to give effect to elements of justice. Professor Motala refers to the Ahmad decision. I mean, that was one of the seminal decisions that he did, where he used the common law to then create a precedent and a change in thinking to give a widow who was not married according to the laws of the country, but according to religious rights, the right to claim for a loss of support, when in terms of the law she would have been denied that. Was it technically correct? Well, he made it technically correct. Was it just? Certainly it was. And as we continue to look through the various matters that he dealt with, both from trying to subvert the apartheid legislation as an advocate, and then later from the bench, where he sought to reshape the social order through the use of law and the courts. Comments have been made regarding the fact that the judiciary was the gatekeeper, but a robust judiciary. I remember initially, someone asked me to say, well, what happens if you ever went up against Ismail Mahomed? Surely he'll go easy on you. And I said, first of all, I don't want to go up against him, but I can promise you if I go up against him, he will give me the grilling of my life. He will expect me to exceed him. So that was him. If he thought you were worthy of it, he pushed you. That was the first thing. But secondly, he would not slack on something like that. So from the bench, and I heard this complaint a few times, he doesn't let us finish our arguments. He was invasive in the extreme. And as people, counsel, advocates, attorneys appearing before him, if you're not used to that sort of interventionist, very robust questioning from the bench, it could be daunting. But that's what he transformed the judiciary into. How many people on the bench now are interventionists? And I think I sit next to someone here that has employed that to great effect. So it's a legacy of not only transforming thinking, but doing things differently. And that, for me, is the Ismail Mahomed that is unique. I think we do him a disservice also sometimes by relegating him to a community leader or even a national leader. He was world class and he will always be world class.
Yes.
Maybe I should just end there. Ba, you are world class.
I'd like to thank the panelists. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Thank you. It's wonderful. Okay.
He threw Ismail's attitude to you depended upon, I suppose, the classic Martin Luther King statement, that's the character of the person rather than their color, that absolutely determines your assessment of them. That was Ismail to a T. So I met this very famous man who was a seriously brilliant advocate. I was early 30s, and you just got a sense of Ismail that once he'd worked you up, you know, then you could almost do nothing wrong, frankly. That was Ismail. He was very much an intellectual father. He was the sort of person who encouraged me, with whom I could share my own anxieties about South African society, and in a sense sort of give real fundamental intellectual guidance in all sorts of ways, and then being also a role model, the sort of person one wanted to be when one grew up. Well, how is it that somebody who, in a sense, was so subjected to egregious racism throughout his life, lived in a township, as we've indicated, had to have his sandwiches in the toilet because he couldn't actually get chambers, and couldn't eat in chambers because he was a sort of door tenant, and if there was nobody, if all the chambers are occupied, Lord Lowe knows where he went, but he certainly couldn't go to a restaurant given the Group Areas Act. How did somebody like that, with all of those obstacles placed in his way, how did he manage to sort of come out on top? And the answer is that Ismail sort of resented. Of course, he himself suggested on numerous occasions that apartheid had injured him fatally. But he didn't take it as an excuse for incompetence, far from it. Ismail abhorred incompetence and laziness. His argument was, you've got to be the best possible. But so his anger was, in a sense, a totally justified anger. It might have meant from time to time he was ruder than he might otherwise have been. Couldn't blame him. But the point was that for somebody who essentially was able to say, I will take every abhorrent obstacle that the apartheid government puts in my way, and I will negotiate myself through them, and I'll get to the top of my profession and actually make the kind of contribution that he did make, that to me marks an utterly extraordinary person.
The first thing I remember about Ismail was his smile. Big, warm, radiant, welcoming smile. I was at Wits. I'm studying law at UCT. I'm 17. I've just become politically active. And I'm meeting comrades in the struggle at Wits. I'm introduced to Ismail Mahomed. He's whipped away to speak at a mass meeting. He comes back a few minutes later. He swayed the whole audience impromptu. And Transvaal Indian Youth Congress meant so much to me, to my consciousness, a brilliant generation, and they suffer in the struggle. Kathrada, his story is well known. Barney Desai was with them then. People like Mosi Muller and Jasset, who escaped from prison, got out. People like Indus Naidu, who was set up in MK and shot, tortured, sent to Robben Island for many years. Freni Jindwala was part of that group, and so many others. Ahmed Timal, who was killed, he belonged to that group, and Babla Sulaji also thrown out of the window like Ahmed Timal, and also killed. A wonderful, wonderful generation. I fast forward to 1960, I'm at the Appellate Division in Bloemfontein, very excited. I've just been in the AD for the first time, and the attorney has invited me to lunch at his club. I've spent the whole morning defending my arguments against a barrage of questions from the Chief Justice, who walks past our table and says, "Well done, Advocate Sachs." And I'm beaming until the attorney tells me the story. About a week before, a young Indian advocate had come down to Bloemfontein to appear in that court. He had the court eating out of his hand, and the attorney told me when it came to lunchtime, I couldn't invite him to this club. He had to go down to his car and drink coffee from a thermos flask and eat his sandwiches, and I just crushed. And that was the life of Ismail for all those years, practicing as an advocate. He didn't go into the underground, he wasn't part of the resistance, he fought almost single-handed inside the legal system, surrounded by oppression, not allowed to have his own chambers, having to squat in George Bezos's chambers when he was in Johannesburg, subject to all the oppressive atmosphere and laws and practices of the law at that stage. I fast forward again, we are now members of the Constitutional Court of South Africa, and Ismail is brilliant, he's sharp, he's tormented, he's quick, he's thoughtful, often on his own, wrapped up in his mind, he's thinking, frequently the second last one to speak as we had our discussions round the table, always incisive, always something fresh, different, a way of articulating the law that was law for people, not ideas for their own sakes, but ideas for the rights of people. In the Izapu case, I was so excited by the lyricism, the beautiful expression, such a difficult case dealing with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that allowed killers and torturers to go free if they came forward to tell the truth. And I remember putting down my copy on my desk and rushing to his chamber saying, "Ismail, this is wonderful." He was kind of very, very startled. And then he moves away from us, and possibly the high point of his career was the moment when he's called upon to speak to the Judicial Service Commission to say why he believes he should be Chief Justice of South Africa. Was he a worthy candidate? And the Conservative judiciary had rallied around their man, and it was a man, signed up saying they wanted a person, a very decent, competent person who spoke very, very well, but Ismail followed. And what the country learnt from his presentation to the JSC was he wasn't being considered as Chief Justice simply because he was a person of colour and things were changing. Just because as a person of colour who had suffered from the way the law could be used to discriminate and oppress, he'd learnt how to fight back, how to transform the law, how to see the law as an instrument of justice and emancipation. And he spoke with a fervour and a passion and a clarity and a confidence and an enthusiasm that just captured everybody, it captured the nation. We didn't see much of Ismail afterwards, and years later he visits the court. His hair is now white, wonderful radiant smile, which I hadn't seen for all those years, except maybe once when I spent a night at his house with him and his marvelous wife, and he was very, very relaxed, and now he's relaxed. And I'm saying, Ismail, we've got to bring out a book to get your brilliant writings and sayings. He smiled at me, smiled at me. A week later, he was dead. He'd been paying his last visit to the court. And now today, at last, the beautiful lyrical words of Ismail Mahomed are being captured and presented. They belong to the world. They belong to all of us. They radiate today as they radiated at that time. The country needs that vision today, just as we needed it so much then.
I think we are slowly coming to the end of our program. It has been a longer than anticipated evening, and I appreciate your patience. We have, Mr. Enver Surti doesn't need an introduction by now. I think he's been introduced repeatedly and referred to throughout the program. I'm going to kindly request he keeps his vote of thanks to the minimum, 1 minute maybe if possible, and then we will move on from there. Thank you very much. Yes, that's fine.
Dumelang. Well, you know, I had to fill in before the actual program started as a result of the collision on the highway. And I'd spoken about the background, so I'm certainly not going to repeat it. Obviously, we have to thank on behalf of Project Justice, and I do so also on behalf of OCAF, the CEO, Shamil Jusuf, for making this wonderful, beautiful facility available to us at no charge. I would like to, on behalf of Project Justice, and we are 3 trustees, I'm the chairperson, we have Boitumelo Tumi who's here, as well as Christelle De Beer. We are non-racial, as you can see. And indeed, they are quite a different breed of people because they just get on to what we're doing and they provide support and service. And Christelle has been a proofreader, she's done some editing and whatever else. And that's the kind of contribution they make, and I want to acknowledge their role as part of the trust. I want to thank OCAF because OCAF has confidence in us, and Aaron, thank you very, very much. You are its chair. And we've worked together. In this year alone, we've produced 3 books. Whilst we have a full-time job, part of my full-time job is with none other than the very eminent and eloquent Dikgang Moseneke, who leads a delegation in Lesotho, where I've had the wonderful benefit and opportunity of getting to know him much better. But we were able to do this, and as a result of hard work. But they've never been hesitant about any proposal. And when we raised the Ismail Mahomed proposal, they said, well, this is what we've been waiting for so long. Please go ahead. And indeed, I want to share with you that the books that you are seeing there now has not been read by the family, has not been read by OCAF, and the only person who had sight of the book prior to this event was Dikgang Moseneke because he was giving the keynote speech. That is a confidence that we've had, and that takes me to thanking the Mahomed family. My deep regret is that Anwar, my namesake, is not here. He received us so warmly, so has Roshan and Anissa and Faisal and Feroz. They were so receptive, so wonderful, so cooperative. They motivated us, they inspired us. They were more than willing to assist us with any information that we required and really made us feel at home. So I feel like a bar in the family. And I want to say to the Mahomed family, Anissa included, thank you very, very much. I do feel part of the Mahomed family because I've learned to know, I got to know the family as a whole, but more importantly, I got to know Ba in ways that I never imagined. So I would know, and Quresh would know, every speech of his, almost every judgment of his, and has spoken to almost every associate of his, whether as an attorney or advocate, or even as a judge. I want to thank, and Project Justice would like to do that, I want to thank all the contributors. And I mentioned that earlier, and I repeat it, not one single eminent judge, advocate, or attorney declined an interview. None of them were too busy to make the time available, and the quality of the interviews can be found in the books. We were so amazed at this enormous, this wonderful contribution, the power of the speech, that we thought it's best to include it as perspectives in the book, and therefore the book is a bit of an opus. It's quite thick, but incorporates the many interviews. Judge Nafsa, you are there. Justice Dikgang Moseneke, you are there. Navi Pillay is there. And certainly we didn't have more time, otherwise we would have interviewed more people. So we thank them all for giving of themselves and certainly allowing us to project them on the screen when we celebrate the life of Ismail Mahomed. There are 3 people that I would particularly like to conclude my vote of thanks with. In fact, 4. But before I go to the 3 people, let me talk about one person who has made a huge difference. As you speak to people, as you read documents and you research, there are always gaps. And this year was a difficult year for all of us. It was COVID. We had no access to the archives of the newspapers. And Ismail Mahomed lived in the year of the analog. Nothing was digitized. The newspapers of 30 to 40 years ago were in print, but were kept in dusty archives. And we said, now how do we get the information in order to augment and verify what we've heard from the interviewees? We spoke to Iqbal Survey, the head of the independent newspapers, and he opened his archives to us. Free access, we could copy what we want at no charge. And then he promoted the book, and not because he's being paid for it, but because he believed that Ismail Mahomed had made an immense contribution. And both Quresh and I thought it's important for us to recognize this wonderful contribution that he has made. Now, the three people in particular that I would like to, in fact, Quresh would endorse the three people fully. He probably would disagree with on the other side, if I'm on the other side, because I've given him a tough time in terms of ensuring that we keep to our targets and fulfill our obligation in terms of producing both the biography as well as the commemorative monologue, which will be launched tomorrow. The first is Quresh Patel. Now, Quresh Patel and I were in school together in high school. He was always hardworking, meticulous about his work. I probably was more mischievous and more casual about things that I did. But we were good friends, and we studied together at university, did our honors together in philosophy, and therefore you would find an element of philosophy in the life of Ismail Mahomed as you read the book. But he's worked incredibly hard to ensure that we produce a book which I think certainly would stand up to the test. If Ismail Mahomed had read it, he would be pleased and proud to say, well, look, it has been, you've basically provided us a proposition, but you were able to verify it. We know where your sources are, and indeed, it would stand the test of rational assessment. So Quresh has worked extremely hard, and he's not here with us today because he's under the weather, and he doesn't want to expose himself in any way because we would be at risk. But he's asked me to convey what I convey to each one of you, his thanks and his gratitude for this wonderful opportunity. So Quresh, you are not here, and if you are listening, thank you very, very much. This project, you are part of this project, and in fact, the project wouldn't have happened without you. We work extremely well and extremely hard together, and certainly this is the result of hard work. So the Human Rights Commission is celebrating 25 years, and thank you for your collaboration. 50 years ago, we were in matric, Quresh Patel and I, and the gentleman who's out here, whose life we helped to capture in a book titled Crossing Boundaries, is Hussein Ayub. He was our Afrikaans teacher and our class teacher. But also present in the audience, and I haven't seen him, but I know he is going to be here, is my English teacher, Mr. Khan, Ahmad Khan. I don't know, where are you? Please raise your hand. Oh, there he is. He would probably be able to assess me and find out whether he's done a good job or whether he's produced some kind of intellectual ability in me. But Mr. Ahmad Khan, thank you very, very much. I hope you are happy with the products of your endeavor, Quresh Patel and Enversurti. And thank you so much for making yourself available. It's after 50 years, it's a long time. But we continue working hard and being inspired by people such as yourself. Thank you for making yourself available. So I've spoken about the first person who's been my friend for life, and indeed I've expressed my gratitude. The second person, and persons I could say, to whom we both owe a great deal, is none other than our wives, Khatija Surti and Shireen Patel. The reason for it is, even if there was no COVID-19 or quarantine, we were on many occasions, in fact for continuous periods of time, in quarantine or self-isolation. In order to get the task done means that we had to remove ourselves from our domestic environment, from our wives, from our children, from our grandchildren. And to our wives, we had to basically cope with our moods and our fatigue and our lack of tolerance and patience. We say, we thank you on the one hand, but also apologize at the same time for making it so difficult for both of you, to Shireen and to Khatija. Thank you very much for your strength and your resolve. But I mean, my wife has helped me all my life, so she looked after my children for 25 years while I was in Cape Town as a member of parliament and a member in the executive. So I cannot but thank her over and over again for my achievements, and really thank you very much for being here today as well. And I'm so pleased that my daughters are here. Now, somebody, in fact, Dikgang Museneke, Judge Justice Dikgang Museneke, told me, but hey, that daughter of yours is smart. Where does she get it from? Not from you. And I said, obviously not from me. She's got all the skills from her mother. Her mother is has all the qualifications. She's also qualified in speech and drama and a range of other qualifications, but she's been an inspiration, and she's been able to multitask. She's been serving government, she's been a speaker, she's been a mother and an absentee father, so we think Sumaya has that particular attribute. So the third person would be none other than somebody that I've been exposed to in quite a different way, and that's my daughter Sumaya. She's the program director. And I had no desire to have her part of this particular project. But for some reason, Quraish and she had conversations regarding IT and how things could be done differently. And Quraish told me quite honestly and frankly and blandly, Enver, you don't have managerial skills, you know nothing about business processes, you don't know how to market, you just want to write. And you've been in government, you think like government, you can't do things differently. If you want me to be with you on this project, I want Sumaya. I don't want anybody else. So I said, okay, that's good enough. I have confidence in my daughter, and I certainly do believe that she's disciplined enough, but is that the only reason? He says, no, there is another reason. And I asked him, what is the reason? He says, you know, we are both impatient, we are both obstinate, we are both senile, we fight with each other, and the only person who could mediate when we have these disputes is Sumaya. I have confidence in her, and you cannot disagree with her because she's your daughter. And indeed, to Sumaya, I want to say that you've exposed a side that I was unaware of. You are multi-skilled, you've worked extremely hard. In fact, Project Justice, the team, the work that has been done, was 3 people, Quraish Patel, Enver Surti, and Sumaya. And Sumaya had done all the business processes, all the management. What you're seeing out there in terms of the clips, the interviews, the liaison, the transcripts, just about everything fell on her. And this notwithstanding the fact that she has a full-time professional job, she is a professional consultant, and she is a mother of 3 children. So between all that, she was able to devote herself fully and ensure that we keep to our side. To Sumaya, I don't know where you are, I can't see you, but I want to say thank you very, very, very much. The last thanks is to all those of you who are here. It's a very challenging, constrained environment, but for making the effort to come over here to celebrate the life of an incredible human being. To the panelists, you've just been wonderful. I could listen to you forever. Just Judge Nafsa, you're just remarkable. We were talking about you in very good and positive terms. Judge Punan. To my colleague and old friend, John Jeffrey, the Deputy Minister of Justice and Correctional Services, you've always stood by me and with me and walked with me. Thank you very, very much for being here and representing the executive. I do appreciate it. There are other judges who are here, the Judge President of Limpopo. We say thank you to him. I think Judge Magi, Acting Justice Magi, was going to be late, and if she is here, thank you very much for being here. And all other judicial officers who are present out here, all friends, all family, all of you have made this a reality. The dream of Ismail Mahomed will be lived. And I want to conclude, Sumaya, with an important announcement. 20%, if not more, of the proceeds would go to a waqf. You know, just like Harun says, my book the entire amount went to a waqf. It doesn't go to me. Project Justice will receive 80% of the benefits, and its benefits are going to be utilized solely for the promotion of human rights and the celebrations of individuals who have contributed to society, whether they are politicians, whether they are judges, whether they are cricketers, whether they are writers, whatever. So that would mean that we would try to develop a fund which would basically assist us in celebrating those lives, particularly black lives that have been ignored for so long. The other portion would go to a waqf, and a waqf is a legacy that we keep for the benefit forever. And OCAF will manage that legacy for aspiring lawyers, because that's what Ismail Mahomed did. And we would contribute to that legacy from time to time. But Harun Kalla, in his normal, generous way, OCAF and Harun Kalla and his friends will contribute 100,000 rands to the establishment of the OCAF fund for the benefit of aspiring lawyers. That, I think, Ismail Mahomed would have loved to see happening. So we do know many people have contributed. I've been reminded by Justice Dikgang Musineke that the scholarships in the Constitutional Court carry the name of Ismail Mahomed. So his legacy is alive even in the Constitutional Court, and we are thankful for that, and Harun and Okaf, thank you very much. A lot of technical support was required in these last few days, and Sumaya did many things. But she relied on people from OCAF, the technical people, the CEO, the deputy CEO, Mikhail Collier, Sadiq, and the team that's here. She wants me to say thank you on her behalf for all the support that they provided her, because what has happened here is not the result of Enver Surti or Quresh Patel. It is the result of her hard work and coordination, and she wouldn't have achieved this without the support of all the team that have worked together to make this a successful event. We do hope that you've enjoyed the event. We are grateful for all the support, and I could say, inshallah, the legacy and the life of Ismail Mahomed lives with us forever. Shukran. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And our final item, I'd like to just call Mr. Kala on stage to hand over some gifts to the panelists, if you don't mind. All right. And Uncle Zainul, Uncle Zainul Kaji. The gifts up here. Let's do this. This is the family, the brother of. Okay. Firoz Mahomed. So we'll start with the family, the Mahomed family, if you don't mind. Firoz Mahomed. Yeah, about. And Fazila Tayyub. Yeah. Is it Fazila? Yeah. She's not yet. Oh, is it Faisal? This is Fazila. On behalf of. Roshan Mohammed as well. This is Roshan Mohammed. Thank you. We'd like to now call on Shamil Jusub, if he's still available, unless he's left.
We had a meeting.
Yes, no problem. Anisa Mohammed, the panelist and niece of Chief Justice Ismail Mahomed. This one. Ooh. Books are heavy. Commissioner Amir Mia, if he's still available. Commissioner Amir Mia. Professor Ziad Mutala, Professor Ziad Mutala. Justice Mohammed Nafsa. Judge Nafsa. Judge Nafsa. Last but not least, Deputy Chief Justice Dikgang Moseneke. It's on the chairs.
We really appreciate you being here. You know, Deputy Chief Justice always makes time for us. And he's such an honorable person. He's always there for the good cause. And today is very special for us, for you being here, really. I just want to say one small thing, which probably was an error on my side. About 9 years ago, Zainul came to me and he said, "You're from Pretoria. We have to do a book on Ismail Mahomed." And I felt that needed to be shared. And Alhamdulillah, when we finished the book for Minister Anwar Suti, he said, "You know, we have to do a book on Ismail Mahomed." We have talked to the family and we are so happy. Thank you very much for allowing this to happen. That also says a lot about the family. You're so humble. You didn't want to promote Ismail Mahomed because we really asked you. But I think you made the right decision. His legacy is too important to keep secret. It needed to be shown to the world. We know how humble he was. You were probably under difficulty. But thank you very much. Minister, we know that you played a very important part in making this happen. So, Jazakallah to all of you. Thank you, Chief Justice, for being here.
Thank you very much. Oh, thank you.
Sumaya,
Oh,
do
you are
we?
special.
Sumaya, do we get one photo with you as well, with your father?
Why not?
with
May we
Sumaya,
just
with your
conclude
father.
the program? One
With your
photo.
dad.
All right.
Please, because otherwise you'll never capture this memory. Thank you, Sumaya. We have a gift for you, which we'll give to you later. Daddy.
See, the eyes are closed now.
Sorry, I hijacked your program.
No, it's fine. I just like to thank all of you. We've come to the end of our program. It was a pleasure to have you here. And we wish you a safe journey home. Please remember that there are books, the table of books, and it's not just the one book, of course, it's all the books that the Project Justice trust as, in partnership with
Dear
Dr.
Anissa, thank you so much
you
for
very
the
much.
invitation to the launching of Liberating the Law. In my view, a most apt titling for a book to encapsulate Ismail's legal quest and legacy. It would have been a great privilege for Helena and me to celebrate with the Mahomed family, with colleagues, friends and others in the joy, reminiscence and veneration of the occasion. But regrettably, this will not be possible. Considering our mutual age, we tried to live very cautiously in the reigning circumstances and must suffer the associated deprivations. I have no doubt that the book will be in great demand and will serve to inform and remind many, far and near, of the unforgettable Ismail Mahomed, the brilliant, devout, fearless and feisty advocate, champion of human rights and liberty, distinguished judge and eventually illustrious Chief Justice of the Republic of South Africa, albeit for only a few years due to his early demise. To me personally, Ismail will foremost and forever be the unassuming friend and esteemed colleague together with whom, out of the blue for both of us, there was a dire call to accept the daunting role of joint chair of CODESA, and with whom in the succeeding years I pleasantly shared in the excitement, the responsibility, and hopefully the successful accomplishment of this task, as well as the assignment afterwards to appoint a first SABC board for the new South Africa. I salute Ismail and take pride in the honor to be bestowed on his memory by the publication of Liberating the Law. With kind regards, Piet.